There was new video released yesterday showing Nick Reiner calmly strolling near his parents' home hours before the murders. This was obtained by the New York Post. Let's take a look at it. It's video one. It's just a sidewalk. This is just him walking. For the listening audience, he has a bag over his left shoulder. He's walking calmly. Look irate, doesn't look out of his mind. Looks kind of normal. He's walking past a gas station with a hat. He has not yet murdered anybody, allegedly.
26 days have passed since the tragic events at the Brentwood home of Rob Reiner and his wife, Michele Singer Reiner. And instead of clarity, the story has grown heavier with each passing update. What first stunned Hollywood as an unthinkable loss is now evolving into something far more unsettling, as new information continues to surface piece by piece. A preliminary forensic timeline has helped investigators narrow a critical window of time, and what it suggests has left even seasoned observers shaken. Authorities now believe the situation inside the home escalated rapidly, but it was not sudden or random. Instead, it appears to have been the result of tension that had been quietly building beneath the surface for quite some time.
Drink at a gas station moments before he was arrested. This is an ABC News video. Here he is. Once again, he's got a bag over his left shoulder, it appears, and he's kind of meandering around a convenience store, and again, does not look out of his mind, deranged, in any way disturbed.
Sources familiar with the investigation believe the night may have effectively begun earlier at Conan O'Brien's Christmas gathering, where multiple guests later described Nick Reiner as noticeably tense and unpredictable. What reportedly began as an argument did not end when the party ended. Instead, investigators believe it followed him, carrying emotional momentum into the hours that came next.
Video I want to show you. This is of him surrendering on an LA street as the cops corner him. This is a little harder to see, but you can see a bit. Hold on. Where did we get this? Oh, this is from the New York Post. Okay. The law enforcement has since said he went into custody willingly. He didn't resist arrest.
After leaving the event, Nick is believed to have returned toward the Brentwood area. On the surface, his behavior appeared calm and controlled. Investigators describe his movements as deliberate, measured, and purposeful, showing no outward signs of panic. That contrast between internal turmoil and external composure has become a recurring theme in this case. Records indicate that Nick later checked into a nearby Santa Monica hotel. Staff there described nothing out of the ordinary. No agitation, no frantic behavior, just a quiet individual who paid, went to his room, and remained largely unseen. What raised eyebrows later was not what hotel employees observed, but what followed afterward.
Hold on a sec. You can see the cops. You can't really see the defendant at this point. He's behind the car, but you can see the cops are not in like a terror stance that we sometimes see when somebody resists or pulls a gun or a knife on them. They actually look pretty calm. They far outnumber the one guy, but he was brought into custody.
According to multiple reports, Nick secured the services of Alan Jackson, one of the most high-profile defense attorneys in the country, with striking speed. The confidence and immediacy of that decision triggered intense public scrutiny, particularly when reports surfaced suggesting the funds may have come from family inheritance-related resources. The Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office has stated that the critical events inside the Brentwood home likely occurred between midnight and the early morning hours. Investigators emphasized there were no signs of forced entry because none were required. The individual responsible had access, familiarity, and full knowledge of the residents. Security records later placed Nick at the Santa Monica Hotel around 4 a.m., approximately 20 minutes from Brentwood. Again, staff noticed nothing alarming. He reportedly sat quietly, detached, as if separated from the magnitude of what had already occurred elsewhere. Hours later, concern turned into alarm when a scheduled visitor arrived at the Brentwood home and received no response. Phone calls went unanswered. Doors were opened. And in that moment, life changed permanently for everyone involved. When authorities arrived and secured the scene, one conclusion became unavoidable. This was not a spontaneous incident. It was the culmination of a night that had been unraveling in silence. Later that same day, at approximately 9 p.m., surveillance cameras at a gas station near Exposition Park captured Nick on video. The footage showed him purchasing a sports drink. He appeared restless but composed, scanning the area briefly before completing the transaction. There was no rush, no visible panic. Minutes later, around 9:15 p.m., officers from the Los Angeles Police Department, working alongside federal marshals, located and detained him nearby. There was no resistance, no attempt to flee, no verbal explanation. As officers took him into custody, he remained silent. Footage from that moment showed a young man who appeared emotionally depleted, not fearful, not frantic, just hollowed out, as if completely drained. Subsequent forensic estimates suggested that Rob and Michele had likely passed several hours before they were discovered. That timing only deepened the investigation's central question: what pushed Nick to that breaking point? Authorities believe he may have attempted to clean himself up, either before leaving the home or later at the hotel. Even so, experts note that physical traces can remain on clothing, skin, and personal items despite such efforts. Surveillance cameras tracked his movements throughout Santa Monica that same morning, further reinforcing the timeline. Investigators believe the object involved was likely something already inside the home. Nothing elaborate, nothing pre-planned, something ordinary and accessible. That detail added another unsettling layer because it underscored how well Nick knew the house. Every hallway, every room, every corner was familiar territory. As forensic analysis progressed, early assumptions began to fall apart. Initial speculation suggesting a brief encounter was revised after evidence indicated multiple serious injuries. The reality appeared far more complex. Joseph Scott Morgan, a respected forensic expert, explained that repeated injuries typically indicate deliberate intent rather than a fleeting emotional reaction. These situations require proximity, control, and sustained effort. When different injury patterns appear together, experts say it suggests a prolonged event rather than a single moment. From a forensic standpoint, specialists emphasized that real-world incidents rarely resemble what films portray. They involve coordination, endurance, and repeated action, which makes the situation even more disturbing. Investigators have described the sequence as methodical rather than chaotic, pointing toward intention rather than impulse. Another troubling detail from early reports suggested the couple may have been resting when the incident began. If accurate, it would indicate deep familiarity with routines and habits. Experts note that actions taken at such close range reflect a profound invasion of personal space, controlled, deliberate, and deeply personal. As attention shifted to what happened afterward, reports emerged that Nick allegedly used family inheritance-related funds to secure legal representation. The revelation stunned the public. Questions erupted overnight. How much would such a defense cost, and where was the money truly coming from? Nick had no substantial independent financial base. His past work consisted primarily of small projects connected to his father, making the funding source impossible to ignore. Alan Jackson's reputation alone carries enormous financial weight. In previous cases, even reduced arrangements reportedly resulted in legal costs reaching extraordinary levels. For many observers, the optics were deeply uncomfortable, wealth built over decades now intersecting with profound loss. When reporters questioned Jackson outside the courthouse, his response was brief and cautious. He declined to discuss payment details. That silence only fueled speculation. Then, on December 18, 2025, insiders close to the family reported that legal fees were allegedly being covered by the Reiner estate, valued at approximately $200 million. Sources claimed surviving relatives believed pursuing a mental health-focused defense aligned with what Rob and Michele might have wanted. Under California law, a person convicted in such a case cannot benefit from the victim's estate. However, Legal analysts have noted that other relatives or estate executors may still authorize defense payments during active proceedings, though the practice is controversial and legally complex. As of now, neither the family nor the court has confirmed the funding source. Loyalty, justice, and morality are colliding in real time, and clarity remains elusive. Nick Reiner soon appeared in court for the first time, facing 2 counts of first-degree charges with aggravating circumstances tied to multiple victims. The gravity of the moment was unmistakable as he entered wearing a standard blue inmate uniform, a stark contrast to the life he once lived. Standing beside him was Alan Jackson, calm and composed. The hearing was tightly restricted, with no live cameras allowed, only intensifying public curiosity. Jackson immediately requested a delay of the formal arraignment so Nick could determine how to proceed. And with that, the case entered its next phase, one filled with legal strategy, unanswered questions, and a story that continues to grow heavier by the day. The judge agreed to the request and officially set the next hearing for January 7th. Until that date arrives, Nick Reiner remains in custody at the Los Angeles County Jail. With the case now unfolding under an intense national spotlight, every small development is being closely watched, analyzed, and debated. During that brief court appearance, the public heard Nick's voice only once. The judge asked whether he would waive his right to a speedy trial so the arraignment could be postponed. His response was short, quiet, and emotionally flat. "Yes, Your Honor, I do." There was no elaboration, no visible reaction, and no attempt to address the gravity of the situation. The courtroom fell silent almost immediately afterward. The hearing itself ended quickly, but the weight it left behind lingered. For many observers, it reinforced the sense that this case is still in its earliest stage, and that what lies ahead will be far more complex and emotionally heavy. All attention is now fixed on January 7th, a date that could determine how the legal strategy unfolds and what direction the case ultimately takes. As investigators and legal teams prepare for what comes next, attention has shifted back to a deeply troubling and unavoidable part of the story: Nick's long and documented personal struggles, which stretch back many years before this case ever entered the public eye. Born in 1993, Nick reportedly began experimenting with substances at a very young age, around 15. What followed was not a brief phase, but a pattern that escalated quickly and proved difficult to break. Growing up surrounded by fame, expectations, and constant public attention, his world often felt overwhelming and isolating, according to people familiar with the family's private life. Rob and Michele recognized the warning signs early. Reports indicate they sent Nick to his first rehabilitation program while he was still a teenager. That decision marked the beginning of a long cycle: treatment, periods of stability, followed by relapse that repeated again and again over the years. Despite the emotional and financial toll, they did not turn away. They continued offering support, structure, and repeated chances to rebuild, even allowing Nick to return to their Brentwood home multiple times in hopes that stability and supervision might help him regain control. That long history now sits at the center of the case, raising difficult and uncomfortable questions about responsibility, boundaries, and how far parental love can stretch before it begins to collapse under its own weight. Rob reportedly spent countless hours trying to guide Nick through creative projects, believing that purpose and structure might offer an anchor. Friends say Rob genuinely believed that building something together could give his son a reason to stay grounded. But addiction is persistent, and recovery remained fragile. Over time, the home that was meant to offer safety and support slowly transformed into a place of mounting pressure, fear, and exhaustion. What was intended as protection began to feel like containment. Friends of the family have said Rob lived by a belief that a parent never gives up on their child, no matter how far they fall. In this case, that devotion ultimately ended in devastating loss, as the person they spent years protecting became central to the investigation itself. When Rob and Michele eventually attempted what friends described as a form of tough love, Nick chose to leave and live independently. He moved between states, Maine, New Jersey, Texas, searching for freedom but finding instability instead. Those years are now described by people close to him as his darkest period, marked by disconnection, risk, and survival without direction. During that time, his family watched from a distance, deeply concerned but often powerless to intervene. Then, in 2015, there was a brief moment of hope. At just 22 years old, Nick managed to remain stable long enough to work alongside his father on the film Being Charlie, a project that mirrored his own struggles. For a short time, it appeared that trust was rebuilding and that a turning point might be possible. That progress did not last. By 2018, Nick reportedly relapsed again, and the situation deteriorated rapidly. During that period, reports indicate he caused significant damage to his parents' property during an episode marked by confusion and emotional volatility. Once again, Rob and Michele made the difficult decision to seek treatment for him, hoping it might lead to lasting change. By 2020, they allowed him to return to the Brentwood home under closer supervision, determined to keep him safe and nearby. However, friends say their optimism was fading. Nick's behavior reportedly became increasingly unpredictable in the months leading up to the incident, and those closest to the family were growing more concerned about his mental and emotional stability. Now, that entire history is central to the legal battle ahead. Many observers believe the defense may focus heavily on Nick's long-term struggles when presenting their case. Alan Jackson, known for complex and high-profile defenses, has a history of emphasizing mental condition and intent in court. Some legal analysts believe the defense may argue that years of substance use and instability impaired Nick's ability to regulate his actions. Witnesses from the Santa Monica Hotel later described him as appearing impaired, a detail investigators have acknowledged. However, under California law, voluntary substance use does not eliminate responsibility. At most, it may influence how intent is evaluated, a critical distinction in serious charges. Prosecutors, on the other hand, point to earlier conflicts, movement patterns, and behavior after the incident as indicators of awareness rather than confusion. If actions suggest planning or control, arguments centered on impairment become far more difficult to sustain. This case is expected to test where the line between addiction and accountability truly lies. Even if personal struggles are introduced as mitigating factors, they carry limited weight under California law in cases involving the most serious charges. With special circumstances attached, Nick could face life in custody without the possibility of release. Even without those enhancements, potential sentencing would still be severe. Authorities have stated there is no evidence pointing to accidental harm or self-defense. Experts describe the incident as driven by intense emotion and escalation rather than misunderstanding or mistake. What further raises the stakes is the public profile of the individuals involved, figures with decades of influence and history in Hollywood. Potential witnesses reportedly include high-profile names such as Conan O'Brien, Larry David, and Billy Crystal, a factor that could turn the proceedings into a media event of rare scale. Legal analysts already predict this could become one of the most closely followed trials in recent American history. Insiders suggest proceedings may not begin until late 2026 or even early 2027, and a negotiated resolution is considered unlikely. Prosecutors are expected to rely heavily on physical evidence, timelines, and forensic reconstruction to argue awareness and intent. Every detail of Nick's past will be examined closely. His history, mental condition, and movements during that night will be scrutinized step by step. New forensic findings reportedly place him at the scene through biological traces and surveillance data, complicating any claim that he was unaware of his actions. Age disparity also plays a role. Rob and Michele were elderly, while Nick was 32. That imbalance introduces another significant challenge for the defense. While some cases hinge on reduced charges due to lack of intent, investigators argue that the sequence of events and sustained nature of what occurred point in the opposite direction. If confirmed, certain injury patterns and scene details could further strengthen the prosecution's argument that the incident was close, personal, and controlled. Alan Jackson now faces intense pressure to introduce reasonable doubt without contradicting forensic findings, digital records, and expert testimony. Ultimately, the decision will rest with a jury, 12 individuals from diverse backgrounds, many far removed from Hollywood privilege. Will they see Nick as someone overwhelmed by years of struggle, or as someone who had access to every resource and still crossed an irreversible line? That question hangs over everything as the case moves closer to its next phase, and as the story inevitably circles back to the night when tension finally reached its breaking point. Many now believe that everything truly began at Conan O'Brien's annual Christmas party. For years, the event had been known as one of Hollywood's most relaxed gatherings, a place with no cameras, no press, and no performance. Just familiar faces, quiet laughter, and a rare sense of ease. Rob Reiner and Michele Singer were longtime guests, but this year felt different from the start. They brought their son with them, a decision that now carries heavy meaning. Friends later shared that Rob and Michele had been deeply worried about him in the weeks leading up to that night. His behavior had grown more unpredictable, disappearing for long stretches, sudden mood changes, and late-night calls that left them anxious and exhausted. Leaving him alone didn't feel safe, so bringing him into a familiar, controlled environment seemed like the better option. Nick wasn't originally on the guest list, but Rob personally reached out to Conan, who immediately said yes. At first, nothing seemed out of place. Conan greeted them warmly, Rob moved through the room exchanging familiar smiles, and Michele stood out with her usual grace. But Nick didn't blend in the way others did. While guests laughed and mingled, Nick stayed on the edges of the room, hoodie pulled tight, eyes constantly scanning. Several attendees later said his energy felt unsettling, and he approached people abruptly, asking blunt questions like, "What's your full name?" or "Are you famous?" The tone wasn't curious. It was flat, intense, and uncomfortable. Most guests answered politely and stepped away. Some exchanged uneasy looks. Others quietly whispered that something felt off. Actress Jane Fonda later shared that she felt a sudden chill when Nick stood too close, staring without blinking. The most uncomfortable moment reportedly involved Bill Hader, whose attempt to gently create space was met with silence and a rigid stare before Nick abruptly walked away. From that moment on, the atmosphere shifted, laughter faded, conversation slowed, and the room never fully recovered its rhythm. Michele did her best to smooth things over, smiling and engaging, but her eyes kept drifting toward the hallway. Rob stayed close, watching quietly, careful not to draw attention. Nick moved through the house without direction, from the living room to the patio to the bar, mumbling softly, barely touching his drink. Witnesses later described him as distant and disconnected, almost as if he wasn't fully present. At one point, Rob gently placed a hand on his shoulder and asked if he was okay. Nick didn't respond. He stared forward for a moment, then slowly walked away again. By around 10 p.m., the party was in full swing, but the Reiners were done. Michele quietly told a close friend that she wanted to leave because Nick wasn't doing well. Guests, including Larry David, noticed Rob and Michele standing off to the side, whispering, clearly trying to decide what to do. Then, things escalated, not loud enough to stop the music, but sharp enough to turn heads. One insider later said Nick accused his parents of talking about him. Rob tried to calm him, suggesting they go home. Nick pushed past him, knocking over a small table. Security stepped in, along with Conan, who tried to ease the situation and guide everyone outside. In the cold December air, Rob spoke calmly, trying to de-escalate. Michele stood a few steps back, visibly shaken. Witnesses said Nick paced near the driveway, hands trembling, voice raised in bursts, before finally getting into the car and slamming the door. The Reiners left quietly. To most guests, it felt like an awkward moment they hoped would pass. But for Rob and Michele, That drive home marked the beginning of their final hours. Later that night, neighbors reported faint arguing. Nothing that seemed alarming at the time, just what sounded like a family disagreement. By morning, the same house would become the center of an investigation that stunned Hollywood. Investigators believe the tension didn't fade once they arrived home. Specialists say the confrontation intensified in the early hours. What followed has been described carefully and respectfully by authorities, but it was an extreme and deeply personal breakdown. What makes the case so difficult to process is how ordinary the night began, and how hopeful Rob and Michele still were about their son's progress. They believed therapy and recent treatment were helping. Rob had even spoken about future creative plans they could work on together, something grounding, something constructive. No one imagined how quickly everything would unravel. When news broke, Hollywood reacted first with disbelief, then with grief. Tributes poured in as colleagues and fans struggled to reconcile the loss with the people they knew. Attention soon turned to Nick's history, his struggles, and the warning signs that now felt impossible to ignore. Old interviews resurfaced, including one where he said he felt born into a spotlight he never asked for, words that now carried painful weight. As the investigation continued, surveillance footage, forensic analysis, and witness statements from the party were all re-examined. The timeline sharpened. Nick's behavior earlier that evening, the abrupt departure, the movements afterward, everything began to align. Still, deeper questions remained about responsibility, about boundaries, and about how far love can stretch before it breaks. Mental health experts describe the situation as a perfect storm. Long-term instability, emotional volatility, and unresolved pressure colliding at once. The entertainment industry was forced into uncomfortable reflection. Several insiders admitted they had noticed concerning behavior over the years, but dismissed it as just another Hollywood quirk. Now, it was impossible to look away. Statements poured in from producers, actors, and friends. Michele was remembered for her warmth and steadiness. Rob for his patience, kindness, and belief in people. Even Conan O'Brien released a brief message expressing sorrow and support for everyone affected. Nearly a year later, the case still dominates headlines. Every court filing reignites debate around mental health, accountability, and privilege. What was meant to be a joyful December night became the beginning of one of Hollywood's most haunting chapters. This story endures not just because of what happened, but because of what it destroyed. A family that spent years trying to stay together. We may never fully understand that night, but we can remember who Rob and Michele were before everything fell apart. If this story made you reflect, share your thoughts respectfully in the comments. If you found this breakdown valuable, like the video and subscribe for more in-depth Hollywood stories told carefully and responsibly.